All right, baseball fans, get ready because today we are going deep into the world of lineup optimization.
Ooh, lineup optimization.
We're going to figure out how these MLB teams are putting their batting orders together for this 2025 season and how those choices could really make or break their offense.
It's wild how much strategy goes into something that seems so simple. You know? Like a lineup card. We always focus on individual players, right? But the way those players fit together as a unit can be just as important as their individual stats.
For sure. And to help us on this deep dive, we're turning to the one and only, the sabermetrics guru, David Pinto.
Stats guru.
Yeah, you know him online as Stats Guru. He's got all these detailed analyses of all 30 MLB teams on his website, baseballmusings.com.
Pinto's work is truly a treasure trove of insights for baseball fans, and he uses some really sophisticated tools like his lineup analysis tool, or you can call it the LAT for short.
The LAT.
Yeah, along with his Musings Marcel's projections, which are these forecasts that try to predict how individual batters are likely to perform in the coming season.
Okay, so let's break down this LAT a little bit. How does this thing actually work? Do they just like randomly shuffle players around until it finds a good lineup?
Oh, it's way more sophisticated than that. The LAT simulates thousands of different batting order combinations, and it takes into account each player's projected stats, like on-base percentage, slugging percentage, even their speed on the base paths.
So it's basically like a supercomputer that's crunching all these numbers to find the best possible lineup.
Exactly. And here's the really cool part. It generates different scenarios. It shows you the best possible lineup based on those projections, a probable lineup that's more realistic, the worst possible lineup just for fun, and then something called a regressed lineup.
Hold on, regressed lineup. What is that all about?
Now that's where things get really interesting. The regressed lineup basically takes into account something called regression to the mean. It means that players who had really good or really bad seasons are probably going to perform closer to their career averages moving forward.
So it's kind of like a way of, keeping expectations in check and making more realistic predictions.
Right. Exactly. And by comparing all of these different scenarios, we get a really good understanding of how just building a lineup can impact a team's potential on offense.
This is already blowing my mind.
Yeah.
And I bet our listeners out there are just as eager to dig into some specific teams. So where should we start?
Let's start with a team that seems to have this whole lineup optimization thing figured out. The Atlanta Braves' Pinto's analysis says that their projected lineup gets a whopping 92% of the optimal order according to the LAT.
92%. That's incredible. They're practically batting a lineup straight out of a sabermetrician's dream. But I'm curious, is there anything surprising or controversial about their lineup choices?
Well, there's an interesting debate about whether Matt Olson should bat first or Jurickson. Profar is the better fit for that leadoff spot. Profar fits that classic leadoff mold, high on-base percentage, good contact skills, but not necessarily a huge power threat.
So he's the guy you want getting on base to set the table for the big hitters.
Exactly. But Olson, on the other hand, is a legitimate slugger. Batting him first gives him more plate appearances over the course of the season, which could lead to more runs scored. It's a tough call.
More at-bats for your best hitter. That makes a lot of sense. It seems like teams are more and more willing to challenge those old-school lineup traditions. Speaking of which, the Houston Astros analysis mentions this trend of batting your best hitter second instead of third. Is that really as effective as some people claim it is?
It's not just a fad. This strategy is all about maximizing the number of plate appearances for your most dangerous hitter. By batting him second, he's going to come to the plate with runners on base more often.
But doesn't that mean you're sacrificing the traditional power spot in the third position? I remember when I played Little League, the best hitter always batted fourth. It was like a rule.
It's a shift in thinking that data is driving modern analytics really value getting your best hitter the most at-bats possible, even if it means sacrificing the psychological boost of the traditional cleanup spot. The key to making it work is having a strong on-base percentage from the ninth batter.
So if that ninth hitter can get on base consistently, it sets up the top of the order, including that potent second hitter. Are the Astros a good example of this strategy in action?
They definitely could be. They have a really potent offense, and their lineup construction seems to suggest that they are willing to embrace this type of unconventional thinking. But it's not a guaranteed recipe for success. You still need those hitters at the top of the order to produce when they get those runners on base.
All right, let's switch gears now and fly over to Baltimore, where the Orioles have a really promising young prospect named Jackson Holliday. Pinto's analysis suggests Holliday might actually be more valuable batting eighth instead of ninth. Why would they do that with a potential star player?
Holliday's minor league stats are fascinating. He consistently had a very high on-base percentage, which is exactly what you want from a player in that eighth spot. Batting him there could give the Orioles a secondary leadoff hitter of sorts.
So instead of just being a weak spot at the bottom of the order, that eighth hitter becomes like a potential spark plug.
Exactly. He can get on base, turn the lineup over, and create more scoring opportunities for the top of the order. It's worth watching how Holiday's placement in the lineup evolves as the season progresses. He has the potential to be a real difference maker for the Orioles.
Speaking of potential difference makers, the Minnesota Twins have Trevor Larnach batting cleanup.
Uh-huh.
Now this one seems a bit puzzling to me. His projected slugging percentage isn't exactly what you'd expect from a traditional cleanup hitter.
That's a great observation. It suggests that the Twins either believe that Larnach will outperform his projections and tap into more power this season, or they just value other aspects of his offensive game, like his ability to drive in runs over raw slugging percentage.
So it's not always about hitting the ball out of the park. Sometimes it's about those clutch hits that keep the line moving and bring runners home.
Absolutely. The Twins' decision with Larnach shows that lineup construction can be more nuanced than just putting your highest slugging percentage players in the middle of the order.
Okay, now for something that really caught my eye. The Los Angeles Angels have Mike Trout batting third. No surprise there, right? But here's the kicker. The LAT suggests that Nolan Schanuel should lead off, while the Angels seem to be sticking with Taylor Ward for now. Why wouldn't they go with the statistically superior option?
It's a fascinating case study in the tension between statistical projections and managerial experience. On paper, Shanuel's high on-base percentage makes him a really attractive leadoff candidate.
Yeah.
But the Angels may be hesitant to put that much pressure on a young player.
So they're prioritizing experience and leadership over raw statistical potential.
Possibly. They might prefer to ease Shanuel into a more prominent role as he gets more experience at the major league level, or they might see something in Taylor Ward that the numbers don't quite capture.
The age-old debate. The eye test versus the stats test. It'll be fascinating to see how this situation plays out over the course of the season.
It's a microcosm of the larger strategic considerations that go into building a winning lineup. And it highlights that while data is incredibly valuable, there's still a human element to baseball.
All right, we've covered some fascinating teams so far. But before we move on, I want to remind our listeners that they can find David Pinto's full analysis of all 30 MLB teams on baseballmusings.com. And for our Spanish-speaking fans out there, we'll be posting a summary of Pinto's analysis on Planeta Baseball. Be sure to check it out.
It's a great resource for anyone who wants to dive deeper into this topic, and it really opens your eyes to how much strategy goes into something as seemingly simple as a lineup card.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now let's keep this deep dive rolling and explore some other teams and their intriguing lineup choices.
You know, it's amazing how much we can actually learn about a team's, philosophy and strategic thinking just by looking at how they structure their lineup.
Yeah, it's like looking directly into the manager's brain.
Hmm.
So which teams are really catching your eye in terms of how they're putting their lineups together?
Well, if we're looking at the bigger picture, the Colorado Rockies present a really interesting case. They have Brenton Doyle leading off and Nolan Jones batting seventh, even though Jones is actually projected to have a much higher on-base percentage.
That seems kind of backwards. Why wouldn't you put the guy with the better on-base percentage at the top of the order?
Well, it brings up this important question about, the balance between statistical analysis and the human element of baseball. Pinto actually speculates that it could be a case of recency bias. Doyle had a stronger season in 2024, while Jones struggled with some injuries.
So the Rockies might be putting more emphasis on recent performance rather than long-term projections.
That's one possibility. It's also worth noting that Jones is still pretty young, and he might need some more time to develop consistency at the major league level. The Rockies might be trying to kind of protect him from too much pressure right out of the gate.
So it's a gamble on potential versus proven performance. Interesting. Let's move on to another team. How about the Detroit Tigers?
The Tigers are a good example of a team that seems to have done a really good job of matching their lineup with the insights from that LAT. They've got their most productive hitters in those optimal spots, and they've even identified their weakest hitter and slotted him eighth in the order to minimize his impact.
But wouldn't that make the Tigers super reliant on those top hitters? What if one of them gets injured or has a slump?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. Every team faces the risk of injuries and, those inevitable slumps. But by optimizing their lineup based on these projections, the Tigers are giving themselves the best possible chance to score runs consistently, even when they hit those rough patches.
Yeah, makes sense. And I'm curious about the Kansas City Royals. They've been a bit of a roller coaster the last few years.
Hmm.
What does the LAT say about their lineup?
It's interesting. The Royals' projected lineup also lines up really closely with that optimal order suggested by the LAT. It seems like they have their top four hitters in the right spots to generate runs.
So they've got the foundation for a decent offense.
Potentially, but the challenge for the Royals, according to Pinto, isn't necessarily lineup construction. It's more about the overall depth of their offense. After their top four hitters, the projections really drop off.
Ah, so they might be a little top-heavy. Kind of like a cake that's all frosting and no substance.
That's a great way to put it. They'll need those top four hitters to really carry a lot of the weight on offense if they want to be competitive this season. And they're going to be hoping that some of their younger players can exceed those expectations and provide some much needed depth.
All right, let's shift gears to the New York Yankees. They're always a fascinating team to watch, especially with their big-name lineup. What does Pinto's analysis say about their offensive strategy?
The Yankees, as usual, have a really strong lineup on paper. They have a good blend of power and on-base percentage throughout their order. And get this, they have Jason Dominguez, the super hyped prospect leading off.
Dominguez leading off. That's a bold move, putting that kind of pressure on a young player.
Well, it's a decision that the LAT seems to support. Dominguez has a history of getting on base at a high rate in the minors, which is exactly what you want from that leadoff hitter. The Yankees are definitely putting their faith in his potential.
So they're not afraid to shake things up and go with youth over experience. How about the Pittsburgh Pirates? They're still in a bit of a rebuilding phase, right?
Yeah, they are. But even so, Pinto's analysis suggests that they've made some good decisions with their lineup construction. They've identified their strongest hitters, and they've put them in the spots where they can make the biggest difference.
So even teams that aren't expected to contend for a championship can still benefit from strategic lineup construction.
For sure. Every run matters, and a well-crafted lineup can help a team grab a few extra wins over the course of the season. It can also help young players develop and get some valuable experience.
Okay, let's wrap up this part of our deep dive by taking a look at two more teams. First up, the San Diego Padres. They have so much star power, so I'm really curious to see what Pinto's analysis reveals.
The Padres are a great example of a team that understands the importance of both ends of that lineup. They've got Luis Arias leading off, who's projected to have the highest on-base percentage on the whole team, and they've got Elias Diaz, who's projected to be their weakest hitter, batting eighth, which minimizes his impact on their overall offensive output.
So they're playing the percentages, maximizing their strengths, and minimizing their weaknesses.
Exactly. And finally, let's talk about the Washington Nationals. They're another team that's going through a bit of a transition, but their lineup construction shows some promising signs.
What have they done that stands out?
Well, they've got a solid group of young players, including Kuiper Ruiz, Paul DeJong, and Jacob Young, who are all projected to be productive hitters.
And they have C.J. Abrams leading off, even though his projected on-base percentage isn't super high.
Right. And it suggests that the Nationals are willing to take a chance on Abrams' potential and give him that chance to develop as a leadoff hitter. They're not just focused on winning right now, they're also thinking about the future.
That's a great point. It's not just about winning today. It's about building a team that can compete for years to come.
Exactly. And that's what makes lineup optimization so fascinating. It's this blend of short-term and long-term thinking, data analysis, and gut feeling. There's no perfect formula, and it's always changing.
Yeah, it's like a giant puzzle that every manager is trying to solve using all these different pieces and strategies.
And that's what keeps us coming back for more, right? The endless possibilities and that constant search for the perfect lineup.
Yeah, it really is amazing how much depth there is to this sport.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as a batting order can create so much discussion and analysis.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so fun. We can look at all this data and all these projections, but at the end of the day, we won't really know how these lineups will do until they actually play the games.
That's the beauty of baseball, right?
Yeah.
It's a game of constant, adjustments and surprises. So for our listeners out there who might be wondering, why should I care about all this lineup stuff? What would you say to them?
Well, it really changes the way we watch and understand the game.
Yeah.
When you see a manager make a lineup decision, that seems a little strange. It might not be just a random choice. There might be a data-driven reason behind it, or it could even be a calculated risk based on how a player has been doing recently, or even who they're playing against.
So basically, we should all be looking at those lineup cards a little more closely and really thinking about the reasons behind the decisions.
Exactly. It adds another layer of, depth and excitement to the game. And who knows, maybe you'll even be able to guess what a manager will do next.
Now, that would be impressive. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've learned about the tools and techniques behind building the best lineup we've seen, how different teams are approaching this challenge, and we've even gained a new appreciation for the strategic choices that managers make on a daily basis.
And as we head into this 2025 season, it'll be really interesting to see how all these lineups actually perform in real games. Will those data-driven projections come true? Will managers stick with their original plans, or will they have to adapt based on, how their players are doing and other factors that pop up?
Those are great questions. So for our listeners out there, here's a final thought-provoking question for you to ponder. As the season goes on, pay attention to how teams adjust their lineups. Do those changes match up with what the LAT suggested? Do they help the team score more runs? Or do they tell us something completely different about how the manager thinks strategically?
It's a really dynamic and ever-changing part of the game. So stay tuned, keep learning, and enjoy the ride.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, you can check out all of David Pinto's amazing work on baseballmusings.com. It's a must-read for any serious baseball fan.
And don't forget to head over to Planeta Baseball for a summary of Pinto's analysis in Spanish.
Wait.
We want to make sure that all baseball fans, no matter what language they speak, can join in on the fun.
That's right. Baseball truly is a universal language, and lineup optimization is something that every fan can be a part of. So until next time, keep those bats swinging, those minds thinking, and those lineups optimized.